Earlier this month, the world witnessed the assassination of prominent conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. While it seems many people have been mourning his death while others have been celebrating it, perhaps there are some satanic third-side views to consider. In this episode of Satansplain, I'll share my full thoughts on Charlie Kirk and the impact of his death, along with a necessary recap on politics and Satanism.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain. Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. As you regular listeners of Satansplain already know, I don't do too much in the way of topical news material. There have been a few episodes here and there where I looked at certain hot news items and gave my hot take on them as a Satanist, but for the most part, that's not what I do. I usually try to talk about topics that are still going to be relevant to Satanism 1 year from now or 10 years from now, so on. But with so many still talking about the September 10th assassination of Charlie Kirk, I do have a lot of thoughts to share on that here on Satansplain. No doubt there will be some idiots out there who react to the headline of this episode without bothering to listen to it first. We see that on social media now and then. But for the rest of you, let's begin. Like a lot of Americans, I thought most people knew who Charlie Kirk was, but I've run into a surprising number who had seemingly never heard of him. So for those who don't know, Charlie Kirk was a young American conservative activist. Back in 2012, at the age of 19, he founded Turning Point USA, which is a conservative organization particularly directed at educating and mobilizing students on college campuses. What I think Charlie Kirk was more specifically known for was going to college campuses to give speeches and then open things to debate or Q&A, often one-on-one with just him and whoever from the crowd was willing to step up to the microphone on his or her turn. So Charlie Kirk would sometimes also be on event panels with other speakers, but usually it seemed to be just him. There's lots of popular clips on YouTube and the like of him debating students here and there. Now, Charlie Kirk is not to be confused with Steven Crowder. Steven Crowder is another conservative talk show host who would set up tables in public squares or on college campuses with a banner saying, "Change my mind." I'm sure you've seen that meme before. The guy sitting at the table holding a coffee mug, and on the table is a banner saying, fill in the blank, change my mind. Well, that's Steven Crowder, not Charlie Kirk. I've seen some people lately mess up memes with the two of them. But like I said, Charlie Kirk would similarly go to colleges and invite people to ask questions and even debate with him. And it was during a public event of his on September 10th, 2025, that he was assassinated, dying at the age of 31. As you can imagine, in this day and age of fierce political collectivism, you have lots of conservatives mourning Charlie Kirk's death, and lots of liberals unashamedly and publicly celebrating his death. And to be clear, Kirk was not just some random Christian conservative. He was immensely popular. He was a household name for conservatives, as well as many libertarians, centrists, and others whom I guess you could classify as not left of center. Or perhaps to put it another way, people who typically are not watching TV shows like Saturday Night Live or The View or Stephen Colbert, but rather maybe tuning into conservative radio, which has now evolved to conservative podcasts and other independent journalists. And Charlie Kirk, in particular, is credited with having a tremendous influence on conservative youth, which in turn is believed to have a lot to do with the 2024 re-election of President Donald Trump. In fact, there were many who saw Charlie Kirk as somebody himself who could very well be a future president of the United States. So my point here is that whether you liked Charlie Kirk or you hated him or you were indifferent to him or you never heard about him until today, I would argue that his assassination has had a big impact on a large number of people. And when you especially take that into consideration, his death, I suspect, will have some long-lasting effects, as we've seen happen with the abrupt assassinations of other influential figures over the years. Of course, the moment he was shot, people were already jumping to different conclusions about who shot him and why. The most obvious conclusion people were jumping to was, Charlie Kirk was a very active conservative Christian, so it must have been a radically left-wing person who shot him. But then you also had people saying, no, he had enemies on the far right, too. The Groypers hated him for not being conservative enough, and they're mad that their leader, Nick Fuentes, was banned from Turning Point USA events. So yeah, I think it was probably a Groyper who shot him. And then you had people saying, hey, Charlie Kirk was a big supporter of Israel, and then he started to question what they were doing in these last few weeks. So I think it was an assassin from the Israeli government. Or people saying, no, I was listening to comedian Jimmy Kimmel on TV, and he said it was one of these MAGA people who shot him, so that must have been the case. Well, I'm not going to entertain every conspiracy theory that everybody has. But given how high profile and influential Kirk was as a conservative and going to places where he'd confront people with very left-wing views, I don't think it's far-fetched at all to suspect it was somebody of the more left-wing variety who shot him. In any case, his alleged assassin has since been caught, and of course people are spinning stories one way or another. But all of that's kind of secondary to the things I want to talk about next. The real question for Satansplain is, how does any of this relate back to Satanism? And what can we make of this event as Satanists? Well, true to the American conservative stereotype, Charlie Kirk was a devout Christian, so the average person may think, Charlie Kirk was a devout Christian, and he even preached his religion. Satansplain is a show about Satanism, so this episode of Satansplain is going to be celebrating his death, right? And the answer to that is no. If you're a Satanist and you want to celebrate the assassination of Charlie Kirk, you can go ahead, I guess. I can't prevent you. There's nothing in Satanism saying you can't celebrate the death of somebody you don't like. But no, that's not what I'm going to do here. I'm not celebrating his death, nor am I doing this episode to mourn Charlie Kirk. Instead, what I'd like to do is take a little time to dig deeper than all of that, to go beyond that sort of one-dimensional thinking from either extreme, and share my thoughts as one Satanist, and think of what I think the aftermath of this event may mean for other Satanists. Before we go any further, there is something I've stated many times on Satansplain before, and in this case it certainly bears repeating. Not all Satanists identify as politically liberal. I know there are a lot of people out there who mistakenly think, Christians are conservatives and Satanism is the opposite of Christianity, therefore Satanists are all liberal. This assumption, of course, is incorrect. I did a whole past episode of Satansplain on the topic of Satanists and politics, and it was episode number 5. To recap, the Church of Satan does not have one definitive political view, and that is for good reasons. Satanism is a religion for the self, not the collective. Satanists shamelessly serve themselves, first and foremost, not a god, nor do we serve the equally vague and intangible notion of something like the greater good. The supposed will of God is always indistinguishable from the will of the person telling you what God's will is, or the believer of what somebody else wrote about the supposed will of God. And I would say it's the same with what supposedly constitutes serving the greater good. So I don't play the game of self-sacrifice for vague platitudes, is the bottom line. Satanism is a tool, not a cause. It is not a religion for everybody. As Satanists, we do all adhere to the same religion, which is Satanism, but we don't all have the same priorities in life. Satanists come from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of demographics, There are Satanists you can find among all sorts of careers, economic classes, family sizes, geographies, races, sexes, sexual orientations, and so on. And as a result, we Satanists are not all going to arrive at the same exact ideas politically. Maybe a politician or political party or political cause that serves one Satanist's best interests is not going to be the one that serves some other Satanist's best interests. Or even if two Satanists both agree on some political idea, perhaps that idea is a number one concern for one Satanist, but for the other Satanist, it's priority number 30 or 40 in their list. So, as a result of all these things, again, not all Satanists are going to arrive at the same political views. Some Satanists are going to find that their rational self-interest leads them to more liberal politics, while some other Satanists find that their rational self-interest leads them to more conservative politics. Then there are plenty of Satanists who have a wide mix of both categories, or some Satanists who are flat out apolitical, or they live in a country where the politics operate by some completely different playbook, or it's some other different view. Now, all of this stuff I know I've said on the show before, but like I said, it bears repeating, especially if we're talking about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. On a related note, here is a reminder: you don't have to completely buy into this whole left versus right dichotomy, where you have to be 100% agreement with one side and in 0% agreement with the other. In fact, sometimes I have to wonder what these terms left and right really mean at the end of the day, because, as I have also said before, they seem to largely refer to collectives of otherwise unrelated ideas. That's my view. There's no reason why a person can't be a gay gun owner or a socialist who's against abortion, for example. Something from column A and column B. For that matter, you can be strongly in favor of something and at that same time not agree with the biggest activists of that thing. I know some gay Satanists who want absolutely nothing to do with the LGBT activism scene. I know some Satanist gun owners who don't want to have anything to do with the NRA, and so on. Having said all of that, I personally am what you might call a more right-leaning Satanist, for lack of a better term. And one of the reasons why I am not celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk is because I'm actually in agreement with a number of political ideas he espoused. I am an American and a patriot. I fly the American flag. I am a capitalist. I abhor communism. I want my country to have a strong border. I am a gun owner and a firm supporter of the Second Amendment. And I believe in meritocracy over DEI programs. Once again, that's just me. Of course, I also have my disagreements with Charlie Kirk and his Turning Point USA group. The most obvious disagreements would be regarding, not surprisingly, religion. Charlie Kirk was a devout Christian. I am a Satanist. To say I reject Christianity would be an understatement. I find Christianity to be a ludicrous, self-defeating stack of superstitions and irrationalities. And I came to that conclusion long before I ever discovered Satanism. Now, was Charlie Kirk's choice of religion a deal breaker for me? Or let me put this another way. As a Satanist, am I under some sort of obligation to hate Christians, especially super devout Christians, and disregard any and all other things they may say? No, that's silly. As we say in the Satanic Bible, from every set of principles, be it religious, political, or philosophical, some good can be extracted. And I would like to share a particular quote from Charlie Kirk that I myself like. Back in 2018, he did a long interview on the Rubin Report. That's a show hosted by Dave Rubin, who is a gay man. I also remember that, at least at that time, Dave Rubin was also an atheist, as well as pro-choice on abortion. So, did the show end up being this whole debate or yelling match where Charlie Kirk just threw Bible passages at Dave Rubin and called him a godless sodomite baby killer or something. No, not at all. They actually had a great intellectually honest conversation. Mainly that's because they were two men who were intelligent enough to have an intellectually honest conversation together. But also, despite all the things that they may have disagreed on, there were things they did agree on. And those things they agreed upon were both high on each other's lists of what is important to them. And this brings us to the Charlie Kirk quote that I have. Quote, "We don't have to agree on 100% of conservative dogma. Let's just get the big stuff right. Is America a great country? Yes. Is the free enterprise a good thing? Yes. Is freedom something that we should really embrace as a general idea? Yes. Is socialism bad? Yes." That's pretty much the main key points, and the rest of the stuff we can argue and disagree with respectfully. Well, that was the quote. And personally, I concur with all of those things he listed. None of them inherently go against Satanism. And yes, of course, there are Satanists who don't feel the same way as me. I certainly know some Church of Satan members who reject at least one of those four ideas, and probably some who reject even all four. But if you're still one of these liberal Satanists who can't comprehend how a Satanist could possibly identify as a more politically right-leaning than left-leaning person, well, hopefully my case here gives you some idea. The more important point I want to make about Charlie Kirk is that he was truly great at rational discourse. Yes, he believed in some religious things, which I think are completely nuts, but again, still capable of rational debate, and he was also capable of holding a civil conversation. Because we have all certainly run into one of those obsessive and insane types of Christians who are just incapable of having an objective conversation on anything. The kind of Christian who is incapable of following any kind of consistency or listening to what you're saying and just keeps throwing Bible verses and circular logic at you. Or my favorite line, sometimes they'll say in the middle of a debate, "Well, you're a Satanist, so that means you worship the Prince of Lies, so anything you say is a lie." Well, you've probably heard my comeback for that one, right? Yeah, I tell them, your mother is not a whore. It's fun to watch how they try to react to that and still try to call me a liar. But anyway, to be fair, we do see that same kind of ideological zealotry with some people on the far left. Once in a while, I'll see a viral clip of some left-wing activist who just knows nothing but rage. They have the crazy eyes as they stare into the camera and shout, or they'll be at a protest and somebody will just engage in not even debate, but just asking basic questions like, okay, what does your picket sign mean? Or can you tell me what this protest is about today? I'm just reporting from my YouTube channel. Okay, are you sure that's really true? Well, how do you determine that? Simple questions like that. And sometimes after just a few of these questions, there'll be a meltdown or a rage. Or some non-answers like, well, what about when conservatives do that similar thing you're accusing me of? And again, obviously not all liberals are like this. I'm sure when these viral clips are made, they select the worst from the worst. I'm talking about the kind of liberal that makes other liberals turn and say, dude, stop, you're not helping our side. My point is that when you run into somebody with deep convictions, there seems to be two types of people. Not left versus right, but people who, even if their beliefs seem crazy to you, are at least able to articulate their position and engage in intellectually honest discourse. And then there are other people who simply can't do that. So I at least gotta give credit to Charlie Kirk for being somebody I would consider to be in the first group. Again, in this day and age of fierce political collectivism, which makes many people say, why can't we just come together and discuss these things like adults instead of pure rage on social media or protests? Well, Charlie Kirk, to his credit, tried doing that. He was trying to go out there and talk civilly. And I roll my eyes at people who sneer at Charlie Kirk with one-liners like, he was divisive. No, the country is already divided. He just made a career defending one particular side. Or I'll hear people say, he delivered hate speech. Again, no. Unless you're going to define hate speech as speech that hurts your feelings, or worse, speech that you think may hurt somebody else's feelings, because you believe there are special groups of people that deserve special attention and that you're among the great protectors of them. Again, I think that's just silly. He went out in public, Charlie Kirk went out in public and explained exactly what it was he believed, why he believed it, whether that was on guns or immigration or race or gender or whatever hot topic there is. And he invited people to debate him. If you heard what he said and you didn't like the answer because you don't know a good counter-argument, well, you've kind of lost the argument. And that's your problem, not his. I've watched plenty of clips of Charlie Kirk over the years, and while, in my view, he certainly didn't win every debate, again, he made arguments for what he believed without necessarily resorting to Bible verses or guilt-tripping or supernatural Jesus threats or this other intellectually dishonest bullshit we see so many Christians do. I will admit I was happy when Christian evangelist Jimmy Swaggart finally died of old age. I was especially relieved when Pat Robertson finally kicked the bucket. I remember the crooked shit that they did. But Charlie Kirk? Nah. Again, I personally don't place him in that same category. Could you imagine Pat Robertson from the 700 Club going to college campuses to debate politics, completely open and unedited? Nah, he wouldn't do that. He couldn't do that. But also, I do not condone shooting a man simply because you didn't like his beliefs about something and you were incapable of refuting his arguments. There is nothing satanic about impulsive insecurity like that. I don't buy this argument of, Charlie Kirk was going to colleges and saying these conservative things that people found offensive, so he kind of had this coming to him. No, I think people should be able to speak ideas without the fear of being assassinated. I'm not too surprised it happened, but still don't think it should have. And I'm sure that most people across the political spectrum would agree with that. Not to mention in cases like this, when you kill somebody as high profile as Charlie Kirk was, presumably with the thought that you're taking away his power, that can really backfire because you may end up making a martyr out of the person. And I think that is what happened, but we'll talk more about that later. So regarding people who are incapable of logic and intellectually honest debate, these NPCs of the world, no matter what ideology they may be clinging to, allow me to quote a few lines from the Satanic Bible's Book of Satan. Thrice cursed are the weak whose insecurity makes them vile, for they shall serve and suffer. No moral dogma must be taken for granted, no standard of measurement deified. He that is slow to believe anything and everything is of great understanding, for belief in one false principle is the beginning of all unwisdom. Whatever alleged truth is proven by results to be but an empty fiction, let it be unceremoniously flung into the outer darkness, among the dead gods, dead empires, dead philosophies, and other useless lumber and wreckage. Now, before you think I'm saying Charlie Kirk was a great man through and through and that I can just chalk up the religious stuff to agreeing to disagree, or you think his attempt to challenge modern dogmas made him a de facto Satanist, let's not get carried away. I most certainly have criticisms of Charlie Kirk I'd like to share, which we'll get to after the break. Stay tuned. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
The Millionaire Satanist by Reverend Robert Ing is not a book of comfort. It is a weapon, a scalpel for cutting through the noise of manipulation, cultural sedation, and emotional coercion that parade as wisdom in the modern age. Inside, you will not find hollow affirmations, romanticized martyrdom, or the soft language of passive survival. What you will find is a raw, reasoned guide to preserving your sovereignty, mentally, emotionally, strategically. You'll learn why your survival must come before sentiment, how to exploit societal systems without breaking their rules, and how to recognize the labels others stick on you before you become trapped inside their expectations. This book isn't about being liked. It's about being lucid. It's about surviving with your identity intact, be it in the boardroom, in your personal life, or in a collapsing cultural landscape that rewards performance over authenticity. You've been made to feel guilty for putting yourself first. That ends here. Read it if you're done being used. Keep it if you're ready to think clearly. Apply it if you're ready to win. The Millionaire Satanist by Reverend Robert Ing, along with companion piece, The Millionaire Satanist, The Chaos Planner, can be yours today. Available at Amazon.com. Get yours while you still can.
The Satanic Scriptures hands down the wit, wisdom, and diabolical perspective of the Church of Satan's High Priest, Magus Peter H. Gilmore. These essays, articles, and diatribes have been collected from over 20 years of the High Priest's writings for his infernal cabal, some first issued in the pages of publications available only to insiders. From the magic of toys to techniques of time travel, Magus Gilmore leads the reader down a left-hand path where few will find what they expect. Magus Gilmore reveals principles of satanic ritual in a frank discussion of forbidden rites. What is a satanic funeral? How do Satanists marry? Find out now, as these unholy ceremonies have never been disclosed outside of the Church of Satan's hellish hierarchy. Here is the philosophy for those bold enough to be their own gods or devils.
Visit thesatanicscriptures.com for more information. Released by Scapegoat Publishing. Available in paperback form from major booksellers and independents nationwide.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Visit the main website for the show at satansplain.com. There you can find every Satansplain episode. You can also listen to Satansplain on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, and a host of other places. If you are on social media, please give Satansplain a like and a follow, whatever the equivalent is, on Facebook, X, and YouTube. Likewise, if you're listening now on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button for this episode. For all questions and correspondence, email me directly. The address is bill@satansplain.com. That is the email address. If you enjoy Satansplain and would like to support the show, please go to the show's page on Locals. Point your web browsers to satansplain.locals.com. You can sign up for Locals for free, but you can also additionally become a paid subscriber there. That is the best way you can support Satansplain. Though we also have a merch store as well. You can go to store.satansplain.com for that. And I thank you, as always, to all of you who support Satansplain in one way or another. I've been sharing my thoughts as one Satanist on the death of Charlie Kirk. I'm sure there are still some people out there who may be thinking, "Oh my God, Bill, how can you defend a right-wing Christian?" Well, I'd like to think that I'm secure enough in my Satanism that I can take a more objective look at this whole situation and do at least two things. One, acknowledge some of the strong convictions I did share with Charlie Kirk, which is all stuff outside of the category of religion, of course. And two, recognize that when I see lies told about him, I can recognize them as lies. You see, there's a tendency I've seen in a lot of people in this day and age of clickbait and social media and so on, where people come to have a negative view of a person, and because of that, they'll accept any negative hit piece on that person as true, because it's confirming their own bias is easier than doing any kind of critical thinking, I guess. And this happens all across the political spectrum. We've also fallen for clickbait ourselves one time or another. Every person has fallen for some headline like that. You think, oh, this is crazy and it's true, and may realize later, okay, actually it's not true. I'm kind of surprised at that. We'll be online, we'll see a link to some article. The headline will be in the form of, this famous person did this bad thing. And the people who hate that person will say, oh my God, this is so ridiculous. This is why I can't stand this person. And they'll add their comments along with hundreds of other people with the same rage bait reaction. And none of these people even bothered to read the article, at least not read it beyond the headline. Because if they did, they might realize that the headline doesn't actually match the content. How about that? In fact, some people even fall for satirical news pieces from places like The Onion or Babylon Bee. In fact, to give you an example, outside of politics, I remember seeing a joke article once stating that the band Metallica was trying to copyright the musical notes E and F for themselves. I laughed because to me it was an obvious joke, obvious satire article, and yet there were so many readers I saw in the comments who hate Metallica so much they didn't even realize it was a joke article, let alone didn't know that you can't claim legal ownership of individual musical notes like that. It's as if, they wanted the story to be true on some level. Now, there's nothing unsatanic about having enemies or rage in and of itself. But if you're going to throw critical thinking out the window and just blindly accept any claim that comes your way so long as it's concurrent with what you believe, then as a Satanist, I would say that's a problem. If you already have reasons for hating somebody, you don't need to make up imaginary reasons to go along with those. And in the case of Charlie Kirk, I see people saying, well, Bill, even if you liked these other things he said, and even if you ignore him being a Christian, he was still a racist. He was homophobic. He was transphobic. He was xenophobic. He was motorotosodophobic. I had an idiot recently post a reply to the Satansplain page on Facebook, copying and pasting this list of alleged Charlie Kirk quotes that has been going around. They'll say, Charlie Kirk was a racist. He said the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. Black people shouldn't be allowed to vote. And then I have to say, no, the Civil Rights Act was in 1964. Black people had already been able to vote in the United States ever since the 15th Amendment, about 100 years before that. And I looked up the clip where Charlie Kirk is in a Q&A session and talks about the Civil Rights Act. He says the intent was noble, but argues that it has loopholes which are being exploited so that, for example, women aren't allowed to have spaces with biological women only, like in locker rooms and sports teams. And he says Harvard can reject Asian applicants based on their race. And on top of all that, Charlie Kirk also hosted events like the Young Black Leadership Summit and so on. So, yeah, I don't really buy the racist accusation. Or another one of these accusations I see about Charlie Kirk. He said he would be afraid of a black person flying a plane. And I'll take a look at that and say, no, I went and I heard the original clip of him for myself. He pointed out that there are companies doing quotas based on race instead of merit. So no, he's not saying a black pilot is worse by virtue of being black, just that you can't mathematically get 50% of pilots or people of any other industry to be black when black people are only 13% of the population, unless you start hiring for race instead of at all for merit. I've also seen, he said gay people should be stoned to death. Okay, that must be big news to his gay friends like Dave Rubin. I don't remember him throwing stones at Dave Rubin on his show. And here's a clip of him talking to a gay conservative at an event, and yeah, not exactly what I would call homophobia. He said gun deaths were worth it, and he died because of what he was advocating. Again, no, here's the clip where you can hear what he said in full, and so on and so on and so on. Again, If you hate somebody, you have the reasons for hating them, and you shouldn't have to make up additional stuff, though. But with this particular spazoid who showed up with his copy-paste quotes on the Satansplain page, I responded with a video that addressed a lot of these claims. And I told them, as a Satanist, you should try being a little more skeptical and applying some more critical thinking instead of just blindly believing some massed forwarded list of alleged quotations. And in reply, he just scoffed and said, like I care. I said, you don't care if the things you're posting are true? You don't care if they have any validity to them at all? That's pretty dumb. Come on, folks. Satanic sin number 1. If you think somebody is in the wrong, then again, you shouldn't have to resort to straw man arguments. But I do have a little story about Charlie Kirk and about a particular video of him I saw. And come to think of it, I think this qualifies as a satanic anecdote. So let's go make it this episode's Satanic Dote. We'll lighten the mood a little bit before we get to the big stuff. Cue the Satanic Dote theme song.
Satanic Anecdotes. Satanic Dotes.
If you watch clips of Charlie Kirk at Turning Point USA events, you'll see lots of examples of him, as I've said, speaking on a college campus where he opens things up to Q&A. And college students will come up. Some of them are conservative students who have questions relating to that. Most are liberal college students who have arguments against things he believes or had talked about that day. Well, there's one particular clip where the first person who comes up to the microphone is basically dressed as Baphomet, or similar. He has this rubber goat mask over his head, and he has this red and black ritual robe with satanic symbols on it. I'm almost certain I've seen the same robe for sale on the Spirit Halloween outlet website. Well, anyway, Charlie Kirk sees that he's obviously being trolled. He's trying to hide a laugh. Charlie Kirk says, looks like we have a Satanist to begin. And the troll in the goat mask then starts chanting something incoherent under his mask. I guess he was doing a mock incantation or something. So Charlie Kirk sarcastically says, "Did you have a question?" But then finally, Charlie Kirk stops listening to him and says, "In the name of Jesus, I repudiate this unclean spirit." And the crowd cheers. The troll walks off with his arms in the air like he just accomplished something. You can see Charlie Kirk trying not to laugh still, but then he later says, "Jesus is the way, the truth," and blah, blah, blah. And of course, his audience claps again like seals. Now, I don't think the troll was all that clever or original by dressing up in a devil costume and pretending to ask Charlie Kirk a question. I think it would have been way funnier if he dressed in a completely tacky devil costume, like with glittery horns and a plastic pitchfork or something, and then came out of left field with an economics question or something. Then Kirk would look stupid trying to cast that out in the name of Jesus. Though, frankly, I think he already looks stupid getting all religious and fire and brimstone with an obvious troll. What I think Charlie Kirk should have said was not, looks like we have a Satanist here, but something like, "Hey, everybody, look, Hillary Clinton is here." I mean, his crowd would have loved a joke like that. Let's get real. Also, it would have shown his fans he was strong enough not to take the obvious bait from the obvious troll. And the troll would be disappointed he didn't get the reaction he was hoping to get. Maybe after that, when the chanting started, he could have made a joke about that. This alleged satanic chanting, sort of mock satanic chant thing the troll was doing. Well, if I was Charlie Kirk, I would have responded with something like, "Well, for those of you in the audience who don't speak backwards Latin, it seems this student was asking about erectile dysfunction. And my answer to that is to see your doctor. Maybe stop wearing the heavy rubber masks like that in the bedroom. Okay, next question." just troll the person back. But alas, no. Charlie Kirk let this devil-masked troll get to him, and his wit and clever comebacks, which all charismatic speakers normally have, unfortunately went out the window there. Sanctimony is the polar opposite of humor, it seems. Well, with all of that out of the way, let me get to some deeper criticisms I have of Charlie Kirk, speaking as a Satanist. Is somebody being a Christian in and of itself a deal breaker for whether or not a Satanist wishes to be an acquaintance of that person, or perhaps a fan of whatever it is they do? To follow them on social media, say? I suppose it's up to each Satanist to decide that for themselves. For me, the answer is no. No, merely being a Christian doesn't put a person on some blacklist for me. I can think of some rock stars whose music I really like, despite them being Christians in their personal life. I can think of some relatives or neighbors I'm on good terms with, despite whatever religious beliefs they have. And of course, there are some political commentators I listen to who happen to be Christian. Once in a while, they may get a little religious in some way or another, and I'll just roll my eyes and wait for the next segment or the next commentary from them. There is, however, a limit for me. As an example, I used to listen to Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire. I actually liked some of his commentaries on things. And the religious stuff, well, at first it was there, but it was only once in a great while. Unfortunately, I thought his show was starting to get more and more like the 700 Club. Took more of an extreme religious turn. Until finally, in one show, he emphatically stated that Satanism should not be covered by the First Amendment. That is, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which in short is called the Freedom of Religion, Speech, and Press Amendment. Well, that position of his is a deal breaker for me. So I simply unsubscribed to his channels and stopped watching him. Now, I know there are people who may say, well, Bill, he's a Catholic, so of course he's going to have a negative opinion on Satanism. He's no doubt one of those uneducated idiots who assume Satanists are devil worshippers and blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, I'm sure he is, but rejecting Satanism is not the same thing as declaring it's a religion that shouldn't get equal rights under the government in the United States. I do not expect a Catholic or a Christian of any other denomination to like Satanism or even accept Satanism. But I've met Christians who were reasonable enough to learn about Satanism and say, okay, I realize you're not doing all that crazy illegal stuff like I see in the horror movies, like torturing animals and sacrificing babies and so on. I am still against Satanism for religious reasons, but I accept that you have your freedom of religion, as I do, so on. So Michael Knowles is not one of those more level-headed Christians when it comes to Satanism. And unfortunately, neither was Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk really did say that Satanism should not be covered by the First Amendment. I saw him state that on video, which was the point that I personally stopped following his work. But he also wrote about it later. In fact, he wrote an opinion piece for Newsweek in 2022. I'm going to read a little bit from that article, but first of all, let's think, why would he say this? Again, we certainly would expect a Christian to reject Satanism and even speak ill of us Satanists, but it sure seems out of place to me for somebody who said he believed in rational discourse, and I would say by his actions certainly did, and somebody who considered himself a proud supporter of the Bill of Rights. Seems strange. So at first I thought, well, maybe he's just being facetious. Is he trying to pull a yes, Chad moment in that video? Like the yes, Chad meme, where taking a hard and extremist stance on an issue and stating it matter-of-factly renders your opponent without an argument because he's assuming you're going to avoid looking bad at all costs. And, you pull the rug out from under him by being a bit facetious. Was that what was happening? Unfortunately, no. It was not that. Charlie Kirk's argument was a lot like that of Michael Knowles' argument, which is that he truly believes Satan is real, and of course, like most clueless Christians, assumes that Satanism is the worship of Satan. And here's the big one. Also believes that the founding fathers of the United States couldn't have possibly conceived that worshiping Satan was an option when they were writing the Constitution. Even though, on a side note, devil worship had certainly existed, and the founding fathers like Benjamin Franklin were even involved in groups like the Hellfire Club, which, despite not being an actual codified religion of Satanism that you could practice in day-to-day life, still used all the devilish imagery and probably things like the Black Mass and so on. And Charlie Kirk would probably call that Satanism anyway. But I digress. Let's take it back another step. What prompted Charlie Kirk to write an article like this for Newsweek? Well, the short answer is, not too surprisingly, it was the stupid antics of prank filmmaker Kevin Solling and his trolling goons, or as they call themselves, the Satanic Temple. You can look up Charlie Kirk's 2022 article online for yourself. Look up Charlie Kirk 2022 Newsweek, Satanism, or whatever. It's titled Free Speech for Satanists? ? Let me read you the start of the article, then give you some summaries of the rest. The article begins with this. The First Amendment has long been a bedrock principle of my worldview. I support free speech and free religious exercise both in spirit and in the letter of the law. I've spent years railing against leftist censorship in all areas of society, especially on college campuses and social media. All but the most libertarian of thinkers, however, agree that there are legitimate legal limits to expression. Some things are so objectionable, even downright evil, that they don't merit society's protection. And then he goes on to ask the question, what is the limit that should be drawn? There's the old saying, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, meaning, of course, that you can't walk into a theater full of people and yell, oh my God, there's a fire, everybody out. And then when everybody rushes out in a panic with people trampling on each other and the show being interrupted and the theater losing money, you can't just fall back on, oh, I was just exercising my freedom of speech. There was a case in 1919, Schneck versus the United States in 1919, that he says established the standard saying that you can't use the First Amendment to create a clear and present danger. Then he mentions a court case some 50 years later who thought that it was too broad, and it was decided that the state could only limit speech which, quote, incites imminent unlawful action. That it will bring about forthwith certain substantive evils that the United States constitutionally may seek to prevent. Then Charlie Kirk goes on to argue that everybody should agree that a substantive evil that Americans should be preventing is the worshiping of Satan. Of course, that isn't Satanism, and I also have my own objections regarding devil worship, but I still don't see how it's all that more substantive of an evil than worshiping any other imaginary being at the end of the day. Can you make a secular argument that the act of devil worship is right up there with speech that affects public safety of strangers? Well, Kirk goes on to say, quote, for those who are unaware, Lucifer himself is venerated by a small but growing collection of adherents across all 50 states. There are a variety of different Satanist groups. Some of them are merely atheists hoping to offend Christians with juvenile stunts like placing a Baphomet statue next to the nativity scene. But others take a much darker path. Now, of course, Kirk doesn't say anywhere in the rest of the article who these supposed darker path groups are, but he does explicitly call out the Satanic Temple, of course, being in the former category, and it up. He goes on to say, yeah, they are atheists doing juvenile stunts, like I said, but look, they hosted this event with a lecture titled Raising Children in a Satanic Household. And they say abortion is a religious right of Satanism, and they're even trying to legally challenge anti-abortion laws by using the First Amendment. Now, lest you think Charlie Kirk is one of those dime a dozen Christians who sees the Satanic Temple's banners and jumps to the conclusion that they're devil worshippers and takes the rage bait, well, not quite, as you can see here. He says in the article, to paraphrase, well, these Satanic Temple people claim to be just atheists who only use Satan as a figurehead for values they see in the world, and they claim things like, we're for benevolence and empathy, and this and that. But you see, notice they're trying to push literal abortion rituals. And since I'm conservative Christian Charlie Kirk, I equate abortion in any and all forms with baby killing, which of course I also believe to be something that real Satanists do. So it doesn't matter to me what these Satanic Temple pranksters think they're doing. They are literally trying to get baby sacrificing rituals going. Again, just paraphrasing. And he finishes up the article saying that the Founding Fathers, quote, never would have considered Satan worship to be a legitimate form of religion. And going to the original question of where we draw the line with freedom of religion and freedom of speech, he says the line is Satan. You know, Charlie Kirk's boogeyman. And near the end of the article, he says, quote, conservatives can and should use state power where possible to fight this madness. And even more specifically, he says, quote, we can and should use the law to shut down Satanism. Well, as a Satanist, there are two takeaways I got from this article. One, where the sentiment came from, and two, where that sentiment may be going. First, know this. The Satanic Temple never fails to make every situation worse. Not only for secularism, but most especially for Satanism. The Satanic Temple are not people fighting for the rights of Satanists. As a Satanist in the United States, I already have the right to practice Satanism, at least currently. The Satanic Temple is not fighting for Satanism, let alone practicing Satanism. We don't need satanic parody versions of the silly stuff Christians do in public, like prayers in government meetings or blood drives or school programs. Those things have nothing to do with Satanism. In fact, I'll go so far as to say you can find the Satanic Temple exhibiting all 9 of the satanic sins in their actions. The Satanic Temple is certainly not fighting some good fight for the separation of church and state. They are doing the opposite of that. They are trying to insert religion into state, or at least insert some kind of inconsistent parody of a religion that people have heard of, that religion being Satanism. And I'll always run into people who say, but Bill, you don't understand. The point of what the Satanic Temple is doing is exposing the hypocrisy of Christians. And to that I say, no, that's not what these stunts do. Their stunts merely appeal to the people who already think Christians are hypocrites. Enough for people to give the Satanic Temple their time and, more importantly, their money for more stunts. That's what they really want. But their stunts don't convince anybody who isn't already convinced. Their stunts never, ever change the minds of these Christian theocrats. These Christians do not believe that they are hypocrites nor bad people for wanting their religion, Christianity, and only their religion around. If they believed in religious plurality in the first place, then duh, they wouldn't be Christian theocrats. In fact, these stunts from the Satanic Temple ultimately always backfire because nothing makes a fanatical Christian more fanatical than being presented with something they conceive as the mobilized forces of Satan himself. And that is most especially true when Christians think you're going after children, whether in the womb or out of the womb. The Newsweek article talked about the Satanic Temple's attempt to declare abortion a religious ritual of Satanism in order to allow it under freedom of religion. Well, not only does it not legally work, from what I've read, but it also grossly plays up the worst stereotypes of Satanists, which is of being baby killers. Not to mention it hurts the pro-choice movement. One of the central arguments for abortion rights is that it's a woman making a decision about her own body, and that it's not infanticide, as the other side believes. And you think you're helping that movement by setting up a satanic abortion clinic? But whether it's abortion or trying to get a satanic Christmas tree next to a nativity scene or satanic after-school program, that's another one involving children, or whatever stupid parody the Satanic Temple is doing, the fact remains that it is not exposing hypocrisy of Christians. Again, no Christian conservative ever looks at these political stunts and says, oh, gee, I guess we're hypocrites. You win. No. As shown in the Newsweek article, the reaction is rather, oh, well, if the First Amendment is going to allow satanic abortion rights and teaching Satanism in schools, then that means the problem is with the First Amendment. We should work on putting some limits to that. But getting back to Charlie Kirk, in summary, do I fully condemn this sentiment from Charlie Kirk, saying that my religion, Satanism, shouldn't be protected by the First Amendment? Yes, of course I condemn that. Do I think it's hypocritical of him to say he's a patriotic American who supports the Constitution while also wanting special favoritism for Christian superstition? Yes. Yes, I think that as well. But I do also condemn Kevin Soling and his Satanic Temple for needlessly baiting Christians like Charlie Kirk, baiting them into being more fanatical than they already are. I said that I had a second takeaway from the article, and that is this. Where is this going? Are we Satanists in danger? Well, let's stop and take a look at things. Putting the article aside for a moment, let's try to put the death of Charlie Kirk in the perspective of his fan base. In this day and age where you see so many people bemoaning the fact that we're so politically divided and that there are so many lies about this or that and everybody always seems to be constantly angry and we never come together and talk, well, here was a man who felt he was trying to address those things. He went around to college campuses, which is about as far from conservatism as it gets, and he said, hey, here I am, let's talk. Tell me where you think I'm wrong. Bring your best arguments. If you disagree with me, you get to go to the front of the line. I'm not going to make fun of you or sling mud at you just for asking questions. Here's a microphone. We're here in public. Say what you have to say to me. I will put down my microphone and listen as you speak. And let's try to do some rational discourse and see who has the most rational argument. So that's what Charlie Kirk did. And the last response he got was he was shot dead. Well, what do you think the millions of people who like Charlie Kirk are going to think of that? What do you think they are going to conclude? I would think most of them are going to conclude, well, there you have it. We tried talking to these liberals. We tried having open and honest conversations to see if maybe we can reach some agreement on things, to at least get a second opinion on all these topics out there. And when our most prominent conservative activist did that, you shot him dead. Not only does that show that you couldn't disprove what Charlie Kirk was saying, but it also shows we Christian conservatives can't talk to you. Shooting him in mid-sentence and widowing his wife and leaving his children without a father, not to mention liberals uploading videos of dancing and celebrating his death. No, forget it. We're done, you liberals. That was the last straw. We're through being nice. Well, that's the gist of what many people are thinking right now. Back to the question, are we Satanists in danger? Well, in the rare case there are any conservative Christians listening to this episode, hoping to find some dirt on me, I'm sure your reaction to that question may be, what? You in danger? No, it's the Christians getting shot just for speaking. Okay, but seriously, you have millions of people right now who are understandably outraged on an ideological level. Not all of them are Christian, because not all people who are politically right of center are Christian. But the ones who are, will they turn up the fire and brimstone? Will they see the death of Charlie Kirk as a good excuse and reason for more proselytizing? Now, I'm not talking about turning to religion in a time of grief. It's not uncommon for people to turn to religion in a time of grief. The widow of Charlie Kirk has even publicly forgiven the assassin as a religious act of Christian forgiveness. But I know there are lots of other Christians out there who, despite what their religion teaches, are not so forgiving. I'm not talking about vengeance when you take out justice upon the actual people who've harmed you. Vengeance is one thing. It's another thing to scapegoat, or for mobs of angry people doing something impulsive and irrationally misdirected, especially if they think their lives may be in danger otherwise. Do I think groups like Turning Point USA will dig up this Newsweek article or similar and enact on this proclamation from Charlie Kirk? Remember that quote, "We can and should use the law to shut down Satanism"? I don't think they actually will. I don't think they'll actually enact on that or try to enact on it. They have plenty of other higher priorities right now, including concerns that line up with a lot of politically moderate people, a lot of non-Christians as well. And again, even some political stances I agree with. Though I can't help but to think of that old line, which has been falsely attributed to George Carlin. He did not say this. But the line is, "Never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups." So it could get ugly. Or the death of Charlie Kirk could just end up being viewed as a historical assassination that leads to a change in the zeitgeist in a more gradual way, like people have done with JFK or Gandhi or Martin Luther King and such. Then again, it could all be another news piece that gets buried within a year. Well, all I'll say in closing is that it's not hard to find philosophically anti-satanic behavior and anti-satanic ideology on both the political right and the political left. And there are Satanists who may find themselves to be targets of crazy ideologues from either of those two collectives, maybe even both, albeit for different reasons. I know I still get hate mail from both extremes. But as for the right, particularly the religious right, the Church of Satan did survive the 1980s Satanic Panic. I already lived through that panic myself. I'd rather not have to deal with a second one. Well, this has been episode number 99 of Satansplain. I want to thank you for listening. On the bright side, episode 99 means that we have the big episode number 100 next. You'll definitely want to hear that one. Until then, hail Satan.
You have been listening to Satansplain. For more information about the show, visit the official website at Satansplain.com. And for more information about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2025, Magister Bill M.